Today we're going to give answer to one specific question. Can cold exposure help you to burn fat? And to do that, we will look both at animal studies, human studies, and also a little bit why we have this hype, why people are talking about it. And in the end, I will also reveal why there are so many studies talking about cold exposure, brown fat, and why they're looking into this mechanistically and say that there is hope for a future treatment of obesity. Because I worked as a researcher in the pharmaceutical industry, so I kind of see what is going on here. Okay, hello, my name is Patrick Dahlin and welcome back to Black Belt Nutrition. Can cold exposure, and with cold exposure I mean any type of cold exposure, it could be water immersion, could be cryogenic, could be something else that make you cold. Can that help you to lose weight and lose body fat? The simple answer is, for the most time, not. The fact is, if you look at studies, it's more likely to actually add on fat on your body than to help you lose any fat. Let's start with the theory behind why it should work to start with and kind of debug that statement. The idea is that you should expose yourself to cold, and when you do that you will get more brown fat. Brown fat is there to heat your body and it will then spend energy. This may or may not be true for humans, but regardless, let's say you expose yourself to cold, you get more brown fat. Why would the body then get rid of the fat? It protects you from the cold. So as long as you keep having this cold exposure, the body will try to protect itself by either adding regular fat because it's good insulation, or keeping the brown fat because it's both insulation and keeps you warm. So the entire idea behind, I just can't see how that will help to burn fat, because there's no logic behind it. The only logic for body is to try and to keep as much body fat as possible to protect from the cold. Then I know there's all kind of these ideas that it does this to this hormone, this to this substance. Doesn't matter. Those are just messengers that will help the body to orchestrate whatever it needs to do. So as soon as anyone talk about hormones to be the root cause of anything, I do A, I get this hormone, therefore B happens, they're usually wrong. Because that is not the way the body works. The body works in a very logical manner, and then it uses hormones and other signal substances to orchestrate things. But the same hormone, the same signal substance, will do different things depending on the context, depending on the situation. So you can't really say because I got A, B will happen. It depends on the situation. So if we look at it, what does the study say? There are surprisingly few studies on the topic. There are many studies on brown fat, but that is a different reason for that. Most of them do not even weigh the subjects. They just look at trying to figure out how you stimulate brown fat to be formed. So they do biopsies and all kind of genomics and metabolomics. But in most studies, they do not even care to weigh or measure body fat. And in the ones that have done this, what you see is that for shorter term exposure, and with that we mean all the way up to 1 hour, both rodents and humans, there are no data showing that you would lose any body fat from daily exposure. In fact, in particular in rodents, because there is more research on rodents, there are quite some negative impact on it. They gain weight. Yes. They decrease their BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotropic factor, something very important for the brain, something that exercise increase, the cold exposure decrease this. So up to 1 hour approximately, if you look at human data, there's no difference in body fat. 2-hour studies in both humans and also several-hour studies in rodents show that then you will have some fat loss. because it obviously is so that it costs energy to heat up the body. So if you just do this long enough and hard enough, eventually the body cannot compensate by trying to eat more or save energy in other ways. But the data are not so impressive. For 2 hours a day in a human study, they managed to lose 0.6 kilos of body fat during 6 weeks. So this is 0.1 kilo per week. That is about 10 grams per day. That corresponds to approximately 60 calories. That corresponds to that you eat half a sandwich less per day, or you walk for 15 minutes per day. So instead of freezing for 2 hours, you can walk for 15 minutes and have the same energy expenditure. If you run for 2 hours, instead of sitting in an ice bath for 2 hours, you will use 10 times, if not 20 times more energy. If you're a good runner, it will be 20 times more energy. So you kind of pick your hobby here, if you want to sit or freeze, or if you prefer to go out running or go to the gym or just have a walk. And not only that, if you look at the rodent data, when they do several hours of cold exposure, they also lose weight. But when they biopsy their organs, they do not look too well. There is an increased amount of ROS, that is radical oxygen species, in the liver and the brain and in other places. This, generally speaking, is not a good thing. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, it's not a good thing. And as I also said, it decreases BDNF, among other things. So there are for sure metabolomic changes that happen, but most of these are quite negative. Now, I've only been looking at studies and weight loss here. There are other things with cold exposure that potentially could be beneficial, or at least with some caveats of their beneficial. But if we only look at fat loss, there is none. The fact is that the opposite seems to be true. This you can also see if you look at the population. If you look at people that live north in climate north in the Arctics, the Inuits, or they are usually a little bit round in their shape, compared to if you look at tribes from Africa or South America. They're usually lean. Same with animals living up to the polar bears or the penguins. Compare them with a lion or antelope. So being exposed to cold seems to, during long periods of time, during our evolution, not stimulate you to become lean, but the opposite, to have some additional fat on your body, simply because it makes it easier for you to survive. Also, there's some interesting studies that looks at swimmers and runners, where they both train a lot, several hours a day. Elite swimmers, elite runners, they map their food intake and the energy expenditure from their training, and concluded that they use the same amount of energy, train the same amount of time, they use the same amount of energy, and they eat the same. But it's so much harder for the swimmers to get down to the very low body fat. In this particular study, and there are several of these studies, the male runners were very low body fat, around 7%, where the male swimmers were at 12%, at almost twice as much. And for the female runners, they were at 15% compared to the female swimmers at 20%. And there are few studies looking into this, because they try to figure out what can we do to help the swimmers. These are scientists working with swimming that try to figure out why it is so difficult for them to lose body fat. And they compare, for example, with runners. And I guess we already mentioned the reason. The cold exposure, even though the water is not that cold, it's still colder than body temperature. And in water, there's totally different heat capacities, will cool it down much faster than air will. So the body is fighting back. So basically what we have is a lot of hype about cold exposure. I'm not trying to explain why you see so many articles that kind of insinuate that it would work for weight loss, but they really don't say that. What they say is that cold exposure could trigger some genes to produce more brown fat, and this could be the key to fight obesity. They play around with the word cold exposure, brown fat, fat loss, fight obesity. But if you read carefully, they don't claim that they have a study where they saw anyone lose body fat by cold exposure. But why they get so well funded and do so many studies in areas is because the pharmaceutical industry would love to have a molecule that could trigger brown fat so that you can get more brown fat and therefore increase your metabolic rate. And this may or may not succeed, but of course if you have a molecule that specifically triggers the brown fat, then you don't get all the other inputs that cold exposure does, where the body really has, shit, someone is trying to freeze us to death. We better prepare for this. We better insulate our bodies so we have more protection from the cold. So that is why there is well funding here, why there is money invested in this area, why there is so much hype about it, and why many people that are influence gurus or medical doctors, they read these headlines and they kind of jump to conclusion that this means it will work for managing your weight. But it doesn't, unless your idea with managing weight is that you want to increase your weight. Then maybe this would be a good idea to help you overeat some and take some cold plunges, and that will actually help you get to have a weight faster. So I will stop at this. There is more about cold exposure, as I said. I will do those in a separate video. There are some things that are kind of beneficial. There's some mental aspects of it also. There are some recovery aspects of it also that seem to work, but there's some caveat to it. So they're only useful for you perhaps if you are training for the Olympics, maybe not if you are happy to train 5 times a week. But that will be a separate video. If you have questions or comments, please write it down in the comments line. If you want to see the other videos coming up, please like and subscribe. And thank you for watching today.